Thank you very much for such a warm welcome to such a beautiful city. I don't get here anywhere near enough, despite it being only an hour away. Unfortunately, I spend a lot of time in San Francisco, which is 11 hours away, and they don't even have a castle. So, I was when Brian was talking about what would be useful to speak about, the common phrase you hear a lot in startups is some version of lessons learned, which is usually code speak for tell us about all the things you made a mistake of or made an absolute balls of. In general, I think it's hard to learn from the mistake. You can't build a strategy on not making mistakes. You build a strategy on actually the things that we think we got right, in a sense. So, as Brian just said, Intercom started in 2011 in Dublin, and it started life inside actually a different product. We had a consultancy, and out of that consultancy, we built a little side product called Exceptional. Actually, any Exceptional customers here? Going way back a couple. It's funny, these things live on. With Exceptional, we had a lot of users, but being based in Dublin, Ireland, we had no connection to them whatsoever. I think there was a street in San Francisco where we had more customers than we did in all of Ireland, to give you a sense, and that's not even a joke. So we struggled to talk to them. In 2011, there was no Stripe, there was no cool communications tools, there was certainly no Intercom. There was no easy way to sort of find out who was paying for your product and how would you talk to them. You had to do all sorts of exports from your database, import it into MailChimp or Campaign Monitor, send out emails, deal with all inside your inbox. It was basically a bit of a nightmare. And we had this problem because we wanted to ask our customers, hey, how's it going? What should we be doing? This was actually Exceptional from way back, if some of you might remember it. And we wanted to talk to our customers. Exceptional was an error tracking tool, and that's why none of you understand what's on the screen. And one day, magically, we were like, what if we talk to them inside the product? And pop, here is the first Intercom message ever seen in the wild, believe it or not. And it was kind of the sort of the baby acorn from which everything kind of grew. Here is early back-end stuff of what Intercom looked like way back when. This was cool design in 2011. You'll have to take my word for it. But what we had built was this way to actually talk to customers who were actually inside your product and have good conversations with them. And the number one bit of feedback we got for Exceptional was some version of, I actually don't really like this product, but this little feedback thing you're doing, that's kind of cool. Which obviously was a bit damning of our actual product, but we're like, Jesus, everyone seems to love this bit of feedback. So we started to mail other people. This is page 1 of my Intercom email. You can see the dates being 2011 or so. And the general idea was, I wonder would anyone else like this? And it turns out everyone did like it. Or at least most people we mailed and showed them, hey, would you want to try Intercom? They were like, shit, that thing looks cool. Because we weren't unique in this problem. Most people who have web businesses have no good connection to their actual customers. So starting on the streets of Dublin, off we went. We had just tried to bootstrap a business from the north side of Dublin as 4 people and had not really gotten too far in comparison. So we thought, let's go for the other extreme. Let's go and raise a shitload of money in San Francisco and see what happens then. And so you fast forward, I guess, a couple of months of basically being told no, being told you're taking on too much, being told we've never heard of you guys, being told I'm not a venture capitalist, why are you emailing me, and all sorts of stuff like that. And we signed the incorporation papers August 15th. So actually, we're 2 weeks shy of Intercom's 7th birthday. And we incorporated, and we started in 2011, and we were basically just 4 people. And we had a valuation which was super ambitious at the time of $6 million. And we figured, where will we go from here? Well, today, if we skip a few steps, we're over 500 people, 5 offices, 30,000 customers, and the company's worth over $1 billion by last round. So clearly some shit happened in between. And so what I'm going to talk about is the things that I think we got right. I say I think because we'll never know the alternate roads we could have gone. There's maybe a version of reality where it could be worth more, there's maybe a version where it could be worth less. Who absolutely knows? So please don't take any of this as certainty. This is just kind of my rough interpretation of what happened. In the beginning, it's just you and your product. And if you don't get out of this stage effectively, it may well always be just you and your product, and not even a customer in sight. But the product stage for us, I think, there's a lot of things I could argue we did wrong, and as I said, avoiding those mistakes won't guarantee you any sort of outcome. But a few things I think we did get right. were these four. I think we picked the product space reasonably well. I think we scoped down reasonably well, despite the kind of inherent size of Intercom. I think we aligned our team pretty well. And I think we always prioritized for exploration. And I'll just talk about these topics briefly. The most common advice I give young startups, whether I'm investing in them or advising them or they're just asking me or they're showing up at my house for some reason, is some version of when you're picking your product area has to be viable, feasible, and desirable. And that basically means it has to make money, people have to want it, and it has to be technically possible. Now, no two of these is sufficient. Everyone can want something, and it can definitely be worth a lot of money. But as Theranos found out, for example, if it's not actually possible, it doesn't matter. Similarly, there can be cool things that people want and are possible to build, but they're just not going to make any money. And we have dozens of those in San Francisco, if anyone's interested. And I could go on, but the point being, you need to have all three of these ingredients. And many's a startup that's failed because they only have one or two, and they lied to themselves about the rest. Another piece of advice I generally give is always try to find something that's a frequent, large problem in people's lives. So problems are generally big or small, and they're generally common or rare. And the worst product sort of ideas come from people trying to solve rare, small problems. Something that's an inconvenience that occurs a few times a year. It's not a big enough problem such that you throw money at it to make it go away. It doesn't happen often enough such that you can put ads in it or something like that where you might be able to recoup some revenue. Any of the other three are great, but when I look at the top right, I think charging your customers is a recurring problem that's quite important. So Stripe is a big company. Talking to your teammates is something you do quite often, and it is pretty important that you do it, and that's why Slack is a big company. And I would argue talking to your customers is an important thing to do, and you should do it often, and that's why I believe Intercom has gone on to have whatever limited success we've had so far. I really believe you can explain a lot of startups that have never really broken out or crossed chasms or gone from good to great or whatever your favorite book metaphor is. It usually falls down on one of these areas. Similarly, for those of you who are consultants who are trying to turn yourselves into a product shop, this is probably the area that bites you most, which is you try to build something where you're charging $29 a month, but you're spending half a day onboarding every client. And that will never, ever work. You can charge a lot of money, and then you can afford to send out people, with tool belts and shit to install your software and bring PCs along and stuff. Or you can charge basically you can do no onboarding, and you can charge them a little amount of money. The worst world is when you're not making a lot, and yet you still pay a high cost of setting people up. So the other questions, just if anyone's interested, that I usually try to touch on with early stage founders who are pitching me on their product or anything like that is, it's the basics of hygiene. It's will this problem actually last? So I don't know how many GDPR startups I've talked to in the last year, but I get the impression there's not a long runway ahead of them. We've already stopped talking about it mostly, except for all the effing dialogues. But other stuff do you experience this problem yourself, or are you just trying to be hyper empathetic? And if you don't experience it yourself, you're going to pay such a tax on customer research. It's extreme. How do people currently solve it? Are they currently paying money for it? Do you have some sort of unfair advantage? Is there something you know, or something that you believe, or something you have access to that everyone else doesn't? If the answer is no on a lot of these, I'm really worried about the actual founder market fit, if you like. It doesn't seem like it's a great one for you. So that's kind of the sort of the first piece, which is just what product you pick and why you pick it. The next one is when you've actually chosen a space, how do you not end up deciding that you want to take on every rough edge of it, every piece of it? How do you keep the scope some way small? And we bump into this all the time because obviously we want to do all conversations between all customers and all internet businesses. That's a lot of software to build. But in any given workflow, we see this sort of problem all the time. Here's all the steps involved in someone going from, I want to grow my business, through to my business has now grown a little bit. And we could say to ourselves, well, we need to build all of this shit, right? So let's get to work. And we go and spec it all out, and that could be 2 years worth of work, which as a founding team of 4 people with $500,000 in the bank is just not possible. So scoping, the first principle I would say is knowing where your product starts and stops is just a key thing for me. And that's true whether you're a conference ticketing app or whether you're a email client. Know the bit where you come into play and the bit where you're all right, that's not me anymore, that's some other product. So I generally say you should start where you can add the first piece of unique value, And unique value usually looks like I can do it faster, I can do it easier, I can do it cheaper, I can do it on mobile, I can do it in more places, I can make it automatic. What's the unique thing you're bringing to the party here? And then transition from whatever the previous step was. So knowing that the last thing they did right before was finish configuring their website, maybe we should build a Squarespace integration so it can be single click. How can we make it as easy as possible for them to move into this step? And similarly, you face the same problem on the far side. Where do you stop your product? How do you not keep building? Well, when the next step is bumping into a market leader, so let's say the next step is process a credit card, maybe you don't need to go and become a payment platform too. Maybe you can stop there. But there's also more subtle ones. If the next step is like send an email marketing campaign, maybe you don't need to take on MailChimp or Intercom or whoever. Maybe you can just integrate at that point and make it really easy for people to move seamlessly across your product. Or similarly, if the next step is very divergent, and you'll see a lot of this if your product involves, like, say, payroll processing or taxes or anything that's got to do with specifics of a country. It's done, there's about 196 countries in the world, and there's about 196 different ways to do payroll. So if you want to build all 196 of them, great. But guess what? Your customers are already somehow managing to pay. So they'll work it out themselves. So you could just integrate with their existing solution. It might be a lot easier. And lastly, if it's just an area you can't innovate on, I've seen startups be like, so normally, here's the sweet thing, Des. At this point, they normally ring the customer, so we're going to build VoIP. And I'm like, you could just let them ring the customer? Like, that's not necessarily a must-have feature. What this usually looks like in practice is, if we take the previous example, where we can step out every single thing that happens here, and we can conclude, well, this is the scope of our product, to which I'd say wrong. Actually, that's the scope of 4 products, and we want to pick one product. We want to pick the subset where we can uniquely add value. And we want to work out how do we get them into the first step as easy as possible, and how do we integrate with the last step, how do we integrate out of the last step as easy as possible. That's how you pick a scope for a product. That's how you don't spend 3, 4, 5 years just adding on yet one more feature for one more fictitious customer. And when you're doing this, the other thing that's really important is to obey what I've called for ages the Scopylocks principle, if you like. Pick no scope too big, because then no one can adopt it. You're trying to do everything for them, and they just really want one little thing. No scope too small, because then you're just not worth adopting. That's like, why would I add yet another piece of tech to my stack? If you find a scope that's just right, it's the right amount of software that fits the reasonably decent-sized problem that they actually have. And then when you're actually in the build, the other principle connected to Scopylocks and porridge is cupcakes. I am always telling people follow the cupcake principle. And that basically says 2 things. There's 2 ways to make a wedding cake. One way is you can make a cake base, and you can work away on that for quite a while. Then you can make your icing, and lastly, you can do your filling, and you put it all together, and you're just about to get married, and you taste it, and you're like, Jesus, chocolate, carrot, and vinegar is not a good flavor. Or like the oven doesn't work, or something like that, right? And I guess what you've done there is you've put a massive amount of investment with 0 feedback, right? Another way to do this would be to try to build a cupcake. And that's a great time to find out that chocolate and carrot and vinegar doesn't work, or that the oven is broken, or that you don't actually have the ingredients. But when you get that right, you can build a birthday cake maybe. And lastly, you can go and take on the wedding cake. So when you have scoped, I always encourage people to find that spike, that sort of single piece, that single thread that kind of connects all your assumptions together, and make sure that you're not about to bump into something that's absolutely a showstopper. And that's basically what you need to do to scope. That's something that we've always, like, as I said, Intercom is a large amount of software, but we've always tried to find these like single sort of little cupcakes of value that we can throw out into the market, see if they get eaten, and if they do, then we're like, right, now we can plan something big based off of this. A third piece is, as you add people to your product team, and arguably this is one we got as wrong as much as we got right, it's so important to keep folks aligned on basically what it is you're trying to do. If you ever want to see what a company that doesn't really know what it's doing looks like, it's basically this. Every one of these arrows is somebody probably doing good work, just when you add it all together, it nets out at about 0. And what I've always encouraged people to do is get everyone on the same page so you can actually get this effect. You can get everyone kind of pushing in one direction. And what that alignment usually looks like is having everyone have very clear answers to 3 questions. Very clear answers. This is true across the entire company. I'm talking here in the context of product, but it's true across the entire company. 3 questions for me are, what is it we're actually building? What is the product scope? What are the walls? What are the boundaries? Why are we doing it? What is our vision for the future, and what is the mission for this company? What do we actually believe? And visionary companies have a vision, but they also make it happen. So what is it we actually believe? And then lastly, how are we going to go about doing it? What's our process? How do we work? What's our attitude towards all the basics of work hygiene from like, are we a work from home remote company, or do we show up at our desk at 9 a.m. and do Scrum and Agile? But you need everyone to be aligned around those 3 ideas. Otherwise, you will not get the sum of all the people you employ. And it's such an important concept, but I see so many companies, when they move, like your founders generally tend to be naturally sort of aligned because that's what brought them together. Oftentimes they'll fall out, but that usually takes care of itself. But after you hire a few people, it's the first time at which you kind of, you're likely to just, hey, well, we showed him where his desk was, so we presume he knows what it's doing. Or like, hey, she showed up and like, well, I told her to do marketing and we'll see what happens or whatever. Or like, hey, I hired this whole team of engineers and the manager of the engineering team, she came to me and she said, hey, we want to build an analytics product. And you're like, well, but we're not an analytics company. This sort of stuff happens, and it's so easy to kind of make these concessions early on, but it all comes down to the fact that you probably did a really shitty job bringing people into your company. It's not their fault, it's yours, right? And so you need to actually align people so that when they start, this is so much more important than showing them where their desk is. Tell them what the hell they're doing, why they're doing it, and how you're going to go about doing it. And the last piece in product is, and I think this is an important one in kind of life in general, but it's this idea of prioritizing exploration. So most processes that I see in software, but also in life, they tend to make some grounding assumptions because you need to. Like, let's assume the X, Y, and Z, and then we have a sort of stab at our first solution, and then we say, well, we're going to iterate from there. And we iterate. And that's what iteration generally looks like. All right, we'll kind of repeat, rinse, rewash, go again. And the problem is you're always carrying the exact same assumptions you made at the start. They have incredibly biased you about whatever your first sort of stab was. And like, it's really, really hard to unlock or to like iterate from what's fundamentally the wrong idea onto a great solution or whatever. You can go really wrong and you can piss away a lot of time, money, and people's careers doing so. What I encourage people to do, and what we've always tried to push for an Intercom, is exploration. And exploration looks like, well, we'll try a few different directions at this point, and we'll find out, well, that didn't work, this doesn't work, this doesn't work. This is all good stuff. This is all learning, right? You're trying ideas. Some of them are working. Some of them are producing maybe a sniff of value. And you're like, oh, well, we can probably take that into a solution. And eventually, like, you get smarter every step of the way, and then you find your area, and then you're like, right, now we know a little bit about what's out there. Let's iterate from this point. And I think it's such a stronger way to actually explore the solution space. You've picked your problem, you've scoped it well, but I think it's really important to kind of understand this. This mindset, I think, is kind of has to flow through your company, especially early on. Otherwise, you can get one thing wrong and it can bury you for like years because you just aren't willing to question it in some sense. So we've done a shitload of things in product. I'm only really talking about the things that I think I would do again. Right? There's been loads of mistakes along the way, and if I get drunk enough, we can talk about them later. But the next big phase of Intercom, where again I'd argue we got plenty of things wrong, is once the folks in marketing show up. Anyone here in marketing? Some of my best friends are marketers. I say all that, but as Brian said, I actually did end up running marketing for 2 years in Intercom, so the mistakes are all mine, and I give all the credit to the team for anything we did get right. The marketing stage of Intercom, I think the stuff we learned to get right eventually as these core ideas. First, and kind of quite importantly, starting from the inside out. Secondly, marketing around the job to be done, and I'll talk about what that means in a bit. Learning the ways that people actually buy your product has really unlocked a lot of growth for us. And then practicing effective testing, and we'll talk about each of these. So first of all, here's like ye old funnel, right? You've got like somebody who's never heard of your product, then they click an ad, then they visit your website, then they sign up, then they get onboarded, then they become an active user, start a trial, and then eventually, if you've done your job right, on the other side, pop a paying customer. Hopefully they're paying more than $9 a month. But most people look at this ye old funnel and they want to attack it from the left to the right. Okay? We tend to look at funnels from the outside in. Which means we move from demand gen through to product marketing, through to customer engagement, finally into product. And there's lots of reasons why we tend to do this, but first and foremost, I think it's because it's very short-term responsive. If within a few clicks, you can have a Google AdWords campaign live, and then you can stress over like, well, one ad says free, and the other one says now, and if we change the free to a now, we might get twice the conversion or whatever. And like, it's easy to kind of, you feel like you're doing work. That actually does feel like progress in a sense. it's very responsive. You'll get data within days. And actually, it's very high impact in that if you're doing this right, it is a big lever, like being able to drive an awful lot of traffic to your site, assuming everything's good and everything's set up well. There's whole industries here to help, and there's a lot of like snake oil being sold of like, we're going to double your traffic. All of that junk will be thrown at you. What I'd say is that the best marketing, I think, starts over here and works backwards. And that means you look at things like, are your happy customers genuinely happy? And if they're not happy, what's the point in filling up? You don't want more customers when your product is pissing people off. You're actually just getting bad evangelists. It'd be like having a restaurant where the floor is covered in dog shit, but it'd be like, hey, but there's like 600 people coming in. You're like, get them out of here. It's not a good idea. Similarly, like if your trialists aren't actually buying your product, you don't want more trialists right now. There's something wrong with your business model. Either they're not hitting your usage limit, or they only need it for 10 days and you're putting them on a 14-day trial or something. Similarly, if active users aren't starting a trial, that's the exact same problem back a step. If onboarded users aren't becoming active, or if your signups aren't getting onboarded, or if your website visitors aren't actually even trying to sign up, these are all problems. The thing is, it's a lot cheaper to start it from this side and work backwards. It just takes more time, but that should be okay. It should be okay, because actually, if you, like, there are very rare is the product where everyone absolutely loves it, and the only problem is they just couldn't work out how to tell everyone. It's actually, everyone loves to believe that they have that problem. It's usually not the case. So I think we obsessed a lot. What this looked like for us primarily was product marketing. It was actually this idea of taking a visitor through to being an onboarded customer. And I think we put a lot of time into that, frankly, to the expense of learning how to do demand-generating activities beyond, say, content marketing or the few bits and pieces we were known for. But we were never very good at running advertising campaigns or anything like that, and hopefully we will get good at them. But I think we obsessed in an area that was very ROI positive, albeit with a sort of longer feedback time than, say, running an AdWords campaign. I think what the product marketing investment looked like for us was marketing the job to be done. And I often ask clients these couple of questions, which is like, are you building the thing that you sell, and are you selling the thing that you build? And that's usually a good measure of to what degree are your product team connected to your sales team and or your just customers in general. Like our COO, Karen, always says, build what you sell and sell what you build. And if one of those is out of the loop with the other, you're adopting this world of pain inside your company. Similarly, are you trying to sell the thing that they're buying, and are they trying to buy the thing that you're selling? It's basically the same question, but customer-facing versus inward-facing. And the key point of that is, like, Theodore Levitt has a great quote, which is, the customer rarely buys what the company thinks it sells them. And I think there's wonderful depth to that, because oftentimes people lose themselves in saying, well, we're selling enterprise solution grade, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, that's actually not what people are shopping for when they pick up your product. So to try and understand this, we had a shitload of customer conversations. And we've done this every 2 years. We're on our 4th batch right now of basically a kind of start to finish, let's talk to people in our user base. Let's talk to specifically 6 types of people, and let's ask them the right questions. So we talk to new customers, people who've recently signed up for Intercom. We talk to trialists. We talk to people who've recently quit. We talk to people who are shopping around but didn't choose to buy us, and we talk to people who are active and happy. We talk to people who've yet to quit but they've turned inactive. And all we want to know is, what the hell were you looking for when you started to try Intercom? When you're trying it, how do you compare it with everything else? If you're using it, what are you using it for? If you stopped using it, what happened in your life such that you stopped using it? But we need to know all of these things so that we can build the thing that they want to buy, so that they can buy the thing that we want to build. We have to understand this. And what pops out of these are what we call job boards, and these kind of try to cover everything that we know about a particular reason somebody will buy Intercom. It includes like our internal language for the job. It includes a section where it's like, this is more about this but less about that. It includes what we call the average buyer journey, and this, by the way, we do these for people who quit as well as people who stick around. And we have this 4 forces diagram, which I'll talk about in a little bit, which kind of explains how we understand the journey. And this all goes in, and this, like, sites like our Engage product here, are people buying your product but not sticking around? That was like the exact language we heard from so many people. Like, and I'm guessing, just quick poll, who here has a problem that people sign up for their app but they don't stick around? Right, plenty of people. It is like genuinely like the internet problem in a sense, right? So all of this research let us kind of get that language really, really good, which obviously changed our conversion rates, but generally it changed the way people speak about Intercom. Because before it used to be things like, oh, it's this cool thing you put on your site and it's in your app and stuff like that. Whereas now they're like, no, it's the tool that turns like people who signed up into active users. And you're like, oh, that sounds more valuable than the thing. So what I'd say is like, so some of this is blue sky, and some of this is then like sometimes you will end up competing with people. And Intercom, because of the breadth of the product, we compete with a lot of different products. One thing I always point out to people is this idea of like you've direct, indirect, and then third-party competition. And it's important to think about them that way. It's easy for us to look and say we compete with other chat messengery type things, but actually we also compete with email, and actually we also compete with the idea that you shouldn't have any of this stuff on your site, or so if we wanted to take a message like, we'll increase your conversion rates to market, we're actually up against consultants, SEO agencies, Optimizely, none of which we directly compete with. So it's always worth understanding that you have direct and indirect competition, and you need the different messaging for each of them. We obsess a bit over like what makes people switch to Intercom. People switch to Intercom all the time, and we try to understand through these interviews that we do, what is it that actually pushed them over the edge and made them switch? And similarly, when it goes the other direction, when they leave Intercom, what happened in our life, in our journey, such that they decided one day to cancel and move somewhere else? And to do this, we do this analysis called 4 Forces. And the 4 Forces analysis basically says there are 2 reasons that are working in your favor when somebody starts using your product. What is pushing them away from their current solution? What is wrong with their current setup of Zendesk or Marketo or whatever it is? What's hurting them there? And we love that for us. That helps us, right? It's pushing them away from their existing solution. But then also, what's attractive to them about Intercom? How can we dial that up? What is it why do they pick us, right? Like, what's so special about me? But then the 2 forces that are working against us just as bad is, what is unknown about us? Why are they worried? Where's the anxiety? Where's the uncertainty? Why haven't they already done it if we're so great? And lastly, what's the hesitation? What's keeping them in their current setup? And you'll see this, like, people, I have a friend who badly wants to switch to, like, say, iPhone, but like the existing habits is all of his charging cables. And he's just like, well, and like it's a real thing. I'm like, I get it, but similarly, that could be like, oh, our Slack integration and the way our sales team is trained or whatever. So we try to categorize all of these problems. Our job is to maximize the green forces above the line and get them stronger than the red forces below the line. And that's basically what happens when somebody switches to Intercom. And it's a big change. It can't just be like 51-49 sort of thing. There's this effect called the 9x effect, which is people generally overestimate the value of what they have, in a sense, and people generally, companies generally overestimate the value of what they've built. So this, if you've ever heard the phrase, your product needs to be 10x better than the solution, I like to think it's somewhat connected to this idea. For somebody to switch, generally we think our solution is probably at least 3 times better than it actually is. Everyone thinks that in some sense. And generally customers think that their product is roughly 3 times more valuable just because of the inertia than it actually is. Which means that getting someone to switch software is a crazy thing. Why on earth would you uproot your customer support staff and be like, hey, we're going to move to a different tool? It's a nightmare, right? So this is the very real sort of challenges that we face. But we have to understand this as well as we can. A key part of this is also understanding how people buy, and this has been something that did unlock a lot of growth for us. Some people, when they do their marketing site, they'll say we're a project management tool, and other people say we're a collaboration tool, and other people say we make your team work together better. And again, even more broader is we'll decrease the time and cost it takes to build software, and they could all be selling the same product, but you have to realize there's different ways people shop, right? People can shop based on the problem that they have, not having an opinion about the category. People can shop in the category, we need a new project management tool. Or people can say, you know what, Asana sucks, let's get a better Asana. Or people can say, I actually want Basecamp. And there are 4 different ways you can shop, right? And this is true for all of you, right? There's a lot to like and hate about each of these. You'd love to be over here where people say, I just want your product, I accept no substitute. This is give me a Biro, pass me a Kleenex, where's the Hoover, etc. This is when your brand becomes synonymous with the solution. On the other side, you can basically say things like, we'll increase your homepage conversion, or we'll decrease your cost to serve your customers. but you're such a broad pitch that you've got so many different competitors that you need to teach them that problem is associated with this category, which is associated with this product. You have to walk them all the way down the road to get them to your product. So just as an example, like this is one of our products, our Capture and Convert product. These are literally 4 different ways people look for Intercom. And the nice thing, over here in the green box, problem-based, there are like millions of customers. Unfortunately, in the blue box where they're like, I want Intercom, there are maybe only like hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of people who are like, I want an Intercom. So if we want to expand our sort of customer base, we need to go for the problem shoppers first, and the category shoppers, and the competitive shoppers as well, not just the people who already want us, in a sense. And I think that getting that right and having different marketing messages speaking to different areas has really helped us here. And lastly, I'd say just a word on testing. For whatever reason, we've fallen in love with this idea of testing. So guess which one of these buttons performs better? Guess which one of these buttons performs better? Guess which one of these buttons performs better? We know which fucking button performs better. Can we just quit it, right? So this is what I call like the black hole of optimizations, right? You can piss away so long learning that like actually a slightly bigger, slightly redder button outperforms whatever, right? And the things I'd say on this very quickly is like, when you're faced with like, I want to make my marketing better, the thing you need to ask yourself is, should I redo it or should I optimize it? And I would argue more often than not, you should redo it. It's good to be current and it's good to reassess your assumptions. So I ask, what's changed in your product? And by the way, does your current marketing work well or not? And obviously, if nothing's changed and you like where you're currently at, that's a great time to optimize. That's when it's great to find the slightly greener button. It's a perfect time. Tweak the thing you got when you're really happy with it. However, if lots has changed and your stuff doesn't work all well anyway, of course you should redo it. Similarly, what should you do in these areas? Well, I would argue if lots has changed and your performance was good, there's probably still an opportunity to make it better. And obviously in the other category, if your stuff isn't working, make it better anyway. So that's a roundabout way of saying most of the time you should consider redesigning or at least try bigger ideas. So before you experiment, just always ask yourself, like, when you're looking at like the button tests that they're trying to tell you we need to put live, how much could this actually impact realistically? Do you think that there's like 9 times more people who will click it because it's red? Probably not. There's maybe like 0.1% or whatever. And then if based on that impact, like how long would you need to run this to get to like a statistically significant sample, right? If you're looking for a 0.001% improvement, you're going to run that test for a long, long time unless you've got like epic traffic, unless you're Facebook. You're not Facebook. And lastly, is it damn worth the wait? So the point, what this looks like is like, here's what we're going to test. It might only take me 2 hours to do that test, but it might take me 68 days to find out which one of these is actually better. So the way to think about that is, over 70 days, we could get a 1.4% improvement. Okay, that's the full cost here. We often think it's just the 2 hours, but it's actually the 70 days. Because you can't do anything else in that period, right? Because otherwise you're fucking with your own test. So you have to like keep stationary, right? Another thing you could do is say, well, here's 2 fundamentally different ideas. It takes us 15 days to build this out, but only 18 days to test. So in 33 days, I don't know why I put in 33. That's the one thing Irish people should never put on a slide. In 33 days, you get a 9% improvement. And like those two, it's always worth asking that question, right? Which one of these is worth doing? And I genuinely always ask yourself that when you're running. That's what I mean when I talk about effective testing. Now, if you can get product right and you can get marketing right, they're generally the first steps towards product market fit. And I know this has been covered quite a bit earlier on, so I won't spend long talking about product market fit. What I will say is, if you get anything like that and you start to raise money and people start handing you checks with like 6 zeros on them and shit like that, you're like, whoa, and then everyone else shows up. And this is generally what I would call like the scale stage, and this is kind of the last piece I'll sort of finish on. The scale stage is where you have to change a lot about what you work. You hit this world where what I'd say is, one way to think about it is like, what got you here won't get you there, to quote that famous book, right? I think early product companies, like for a good reason, they work off gut, intuition, ideation, like, just I have a good feeling about this and we should try it. But that won't scale when your product team is 20, 30, 40, 50 people. It won't scale. And even if it did scale, it's not actually a good thing to scale because you get progressively further and further. Are we all doing this? Because you get progressively further and further away from your customers. So you actually are robbed of the tacit knowledge and the insight that you were earlier getting in your career. We used to run a product where we couldn't talk to our users. Now we're doing a very different thing. So the idea that we're going to be the perfect people to have the ideas is not true anymore. Our roadmap today looks a lot more like this. It's not just ideas that we came up with. It's loads of shit we have to think about, right? Loads of things. What does sales need to close deals? What do the infrastructure team want to make sure that we actually stay alive? What does security need us to lock down? What does the GDPR want for requirements? All that shit has to make its way into your roadmap. And actually how you divide your time across these boxes, and by the way, these are just our boxes, your boxes may vary, but how you divide your time across these is actually, it becomes the core strategic question in your company. Are we building a bigger product or are we building a better product? Are we dumping shit out there to see what sticks from a marketing reason, or are we trying to just go deeper for our current customers because we like them? And you don't always get to make that choice yourself. Sometimes things can flare up. We had an incident 2 years ago where availability was a problem. We had to throw out the whole roadmap and say we're going to fix availability. That happens, right? Similarly, churn can flare up. Like churn can be like, hey, well, a lot of people quit this month. Why? Oh, because this one thing. Okay, well, your opinions and intuitions about the market are no longer relevant. Look after your business, and your business will look after you. And similarly, what that means when it comes to new ideas, you actually need to have a relatively level playing field. You need to feel like you're in good condition before you can try anything particularly cool and wacky. So I think, understand that as you hit this scaling point and as you start to measure revenue into like hundreds, thousands, or millions, all of this starts to become quite relevant. The scale stage also requires you to change how you build. You need different modes of working because you're not just working off ideas anymore. Innovation versus problem solving, they look like two different styles of work, right? Innovation, you need permission to fail. It has to be okay to go off to the forest and come back with an idea and build it and ship it and say, didn't work, throw it out. That has to be okay. However, if you're directly attacking a problem that your sales team has registered as the reason why you can't close a certain deal with a certain type of company, you don't really get permission to fail because the problem's really well defined. It's usually like something like we need enterprise permissions or some shit like that, right? It's like it's a well understood thing. You can talk to the customer who has the problem. You can learn about the problem. The idea that you'd fundamentally missed the mark isn't, like it's not really acceptable. But obviously you can't then have the same roadmap process for two very different things. So you need to have this ability to say, are we open-ended? Are we looking for the best solution? Or are we willing to, is this much closer to being, do the thing that basically solves the sales blocker and do it quick and don't try to reinvent how people do checkboxes for permissions. It's not interesting. It won't be an ROI positive change. And connected to that, I would always encourage people when they cross that point of revenue that you need to get to a mindset where all your product work, unless it's like net new innovation, you should have a revenue hypothesis. You should be able to answer, where will this show up? The job of a company in some blunt, horrible capitalist term is to turn cash into code and code into cash, right? Where will I see this money back if I employ a load of people to build these features? Will it increase ARPA, or will it decrease churn, or will it increase our customer conversion rates, or will it give us a unique market position? That's what you need to be obsessing over in some sense, because otherwise you're just going to make a big messy thing that doesn't pay for itself, and Lord knows the world doesn't need more of them. So adding features just to close deals, by the way, is easy, but it leads to a horrendous product. So you need to actually have a decent philosophy about why you're adding things. So as in, if your product roadmap becomes exactly what the last customer asked for, you're going to end up in a bad world. What that world will usually look like is you'll have all these features that most of your customers use, and then you throw open your roadmap to be like, all right, we'll build anything for anyone. And you'll get all these features that nearly no one uses. And you'll justify it saying, well, this person said they'd quit, that's why I had to build that. Or well, look how much money they're paying us. You need to not let that happen. This is not some product purist bullshit. It's just that you're going to pay for that complexity. You're going to have a bigger product, more surface area, harder to market, harder to support for your team, hard for customer success to set any customer up. It's easy to build everything customers want, but everything is a danger there. You become the sum of all requests, which is not a great place to be. One thing I'll talk quickly about is as you kind of become in any way successful, it's hard to maintain your edge for a very simple reason. Has anyone ever heard of Hotelling's law? So Hotelling's law is a really interesting phenomenon. I'll tell it through the analogy of a beach because that's how it's most commonly referred to. Let's say the beach was your market and you were selling ice creams. Here's you and here's your customers, and you have a bit of success, and like they just keep coming, and you're doing really, really well. And of course, this does not go unnoticed. So at some point, somebody else shows up, and eventually they start to steal some of your customers, or they just manage to get their own customers. Maybe they're not yours, but all of a sudden there's somebody else on the beach, right? So what do? Well, what most of us are tempted to do is to just be like, well, if we just nudge down there a little bit, we can get some of them. But what's your competitor do? Well, they're like, well, we can do the same thing as well. And you can keep doing this until you end up looking exactly like your competitor in the same place, doing the same things, selling the same shit with the same language. And your edge erodes to hell, which is not a great place to be. So I just say be wary of prioritizing feature requests that make you look more and more and more like your competitor, whether that's the incumbent monster you went after in the first place, or whether that's like somebody who came along trying to copy your shit afterwards. Maintain your edge, because we need stuff that makes us work like them will eventually turn into we need stuff that makes us different to them. And that's what Hotelling's law says, basically, maintain your edge. Lastly, I just say beware of dogma. I've had to say this a lot over the last couple of years, but every opinion you have in your software will cost you money. Every opinion that you codify into your software will cost you money. And real examples from Intercom. We don't think that we should collect email addresses up front. We think they should start the chat up front. That was our opinion for quite a while. That cost us a lot of customers. We think there's only a few different ways you can set up permissions. Turns out we were wrong. Turns out there's loads. And that opinion cost us money. Opinions cost you money, so they better be worth it. If they're not worth it, it's some dogmatic bullshit. Good opinions earn you customers. Good opinions inspire your team. They fuel your marketing. They reduce complexity. They make things obvious. Bad opinions are like, why don't you do this thing, or you do everything else? And like, oh, we have one weird opinion about that exact thing. Bad opinions will cost you. And you should only really build a product based on your good opinions, the ones that actually simplify your product, simplify your marketing, and make things obvious for your customers. And along with that, I'd say your opinions should expire. We have a large blog with a lot of advice on it. Some of it was relevant at a 6-person company, but not relevant at a 600-person company. Unfortunately, a lot of people read the 6-person company stuff and think it's still true today. And as a result, we hear things like, but Des said once that, blah. And I'm like, yeah, Des isn't saying that anymore. I'm the same Des, and now the advice is different, right? I think you just refresh or just reassess the dogmatic opinions that you have, lest they actually come back to kill you. I think like another way of saying this is a foolish consistency, I think, is the hobgoblin of a small mind. Don't be a slave to shit you've said in the past. If you're smarter now than you were then, it's okay to change your mind. That's what good people do. Another way of phrasing it is either you kill your dogma or your dogma will kill you. And it's been 7 years. Maybe I'll come back in a few more and tell you what else I've learned, but that's everything I've got for now. Thank you so much for your time.
Wow. I think